Yeah, great. Martin, thanks for asking me to sit in on this conversation. I read the book over the past couple of days. It is a book of truth. It's a book of tears. There is a plain speaking truth to it. And I think its importance is that it brings back to our attention the forgotten dead, but not just the forgotten dead, but the wider circle, the family around them. And there were a number of lines, one of them very early in the book that jumped out at me, where you talked about there are some traumas that can't be cured. You can just care for them. But also you talked about the ever-present past, that for those who were touched by the worst of the conflict period, it's not the past, it's the here and now. And I suppose it's along that very thin line that you write and walk when you take on a piece of work like this. And I'd just like to talk to you about that first of all. The challenge of this work when you're so close to it, when your family is so close to it, and to the people who you're writing about.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I guess, my approach to the book, I guess, is informed by personal loss. My wife passed away 10 years ago next month. Now, obviously, there's a difference between bereavement through illness and the violent deaths, which I write about in this book. And so I think the grief from unnecessary death, from violent death, is complicated, and so that has to be sort of respected and explored sensitively. So I guess I kind of brought a kind of a heightened empathy from my own personal experience. That it made me realise that the importance of memories, the importance of kind of preserving the past, whatever, and so, but also. My wife was ill for a few months before she died, whatever, and I was very much determined that, with the passage of time, you kind of get beyond that, and you kind of, you don't dwell on the last months or whatever. You sort of, you want to celebrate the life. And likewise with the people that I'm talking to in this book, I very much, obviously we do talk about what happened to their loved ones and how they died, but as important, far more important in many ways, is how they lived. And I really sort of set out to. So this book zooms in. It's kind of telling the story of the troubles in one parish, in one particular place, but it's also kind of expanding beyond, say, lost lives. Tells essentially how the people died. So this book, its ambition is to speak about how they lived, to kind of put flesh back on the bones, to kind of talk about their hobbies, whether it's racing pigeons or darts or whatever it might be, and also about their relationships with their family, kind of, to kind of make them living, breathing people again for other people to know in a small way, the way that their families and friends knew them when they were alive.
You had the challenge too of what to include in terms of the fine detail of those deaths. A tug of war, I think, in many senses, between what you describe as gore and the glorification of the conflict period. That detail had to be included to push away, if you like, the idea of some sort of romantic conflict. Did that trouble you in terms of?
Yeah, it did, because you're writing about your neighbours and the circumstances of their death, and some of the details are absolutely horrific, like the Newry customs post bombing, where people were blown to smithereens. Like I interviewed Mary Casey, whose father Jack was a lorry driver standing next to Joe Fagan, a lorry driver from my parish, who was the first person from my parish to die, and she's lived with this all her life since it happened. So, she makes no bones about the fact that, they didn't get, a coffin, they got a black bin bag, whatever. And so that is horrific to contemplate. But, in some ways, it would be a betrayal to gloss over that.
It's necessary detail as well.
I kind of think it's necessary. Like the evil is in the detail is something that I would say. You know, it's too easy to kind of glamorize, you know, revolutionary struggle or anti-imperialist struggle or whatever you want to call it. You know, the truth is it's setting off no warning bombings in town centres. Margaret Jamin, another woman that I interviewed, blinded in a no warning IRA bomb.
Young Alan, the 11-year-old killed in
same incident, you know, 11-year-old child. So, like I write in the book about the sectarianism that I experienced at Banbridge Academy, but the chapter that follows is what happened to Alan McCrum. So I say if discrimination is bad, indiscriminate violence is so much worse. You know, I had the chance to sort of move on, whereas Alan McCrum, you know, stopped in time, aged 11. You know, the cruelty of that is
the details of the hands being blown off the clock that day as well. That were recovered, I think.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, the clock is still there and is working again. But even the little detail, and it's funny because like I had to lose 40,000 words from the first draft to the final draft, and there's a detail like, you know, so Alan McCrum was waiting for a lift home in a jeweler shop in Banbridge, and you know, the bomb, he was killed by sort of flying debris blew right away across the street. And he was talking to jeweler Rodney Watson. And the next day, Rodney, he was uninjured in the bomb itself. He was just sort of tidying up in the shop, whatever, and a sliver of glass, you know, he was polishing there and cut his finger. And I was kind of thinking that to me was like kind of symbolic of kind of like, it reminded me of kind of fairy tales, like, you know, pricking your finger on a spindle, whatever. But also this idea of kind of, we become, you know, not unfeeling, but emotionally spent. In other words, we all live through so much horror that it becomes, you know, almost normalized. It becomes quotidian. And what I'm trying to do with this book is try and, you know, that kind of callous fingers that you get, not callous as an unfeeling, callous as in just the skin gets hard through overuse, through rough use. And so I kind of think in the same way that sort of sliver of glass got under Rodney Watson's finger, what this book is maybe trying to do is kind of, you know, to get under the skin, like we've all read so much or whatever, but like we've become too accustomed to it. So this is an attempt to kind of make people feel it again.
I've talked about that as not being uncaring, but at times not caring enough. And I think that's, you know, I think it all became too much for us. News goes in one ear or out the other. And apart from those who are closest to those who have died, they are forgotten. They become statistics in a conflict. You write about the two young Kearns brothers at the start of the book, Rory and Jared. 30 years ago, killed 30 years ago, last week, in that week that's just passed. Forgotten in many senses between the Shankill bomb and the Greystone shootings, along with others, the two men shot dead in the council yard in Belfast, and Sean Fox, 72, shot dead in his home in Glengormley, the 22-year-old Martin Moran, delivering food just hours after the Shankill bomb, shot dead. So talk to me a little bit about the Kearns family as you knew and as you knew them.
So Jared and Rory Kearns were shot dead 30 years ago, this weekend just gone. The two boys had been at school with my two brothers who are here this evening. So that was personal. Mum and Dad knew them. My cousin Lisa actually made a sort of a video kind of documentary with the family. She had been at school with the boys as well, and Eamon had trained her in the local athletics club. So this is personal, like, you know, Mum and Dad, like, you know, when I was sitting in Eamon's shed, Eamon and Sheila pointed out in the garden a plant that was still blossoming in their garden that my mum and dad had given them. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of close connection. This isn't me.
It was their young sister's birthday.
It was Roisin's.
It was 11.
It was Roisin's 11th birthday, and so the mum and dad had gone to an Irish language class in Lurgan. Another son had gone to play with friends. Roisin was in the kitchen. The two boys were in the living room, and then the loyalist gunmen, you know, walked in the door. They didn't burst in the door was open. So that's the kind of trusting nature or whatever of the family, despite living in this terrible time. And so the two boys were shot dead in front of Roisin. And
like there's details that would break your heart. Like, you know, like she was saying that, you know, a substitute teacher at school a couple of years later, you know, had asked the class to write about a birthday or something, and not knowing, you know, her family history, whatever, like, and she started writing, and then all of a sudden all she could hear was breaking glass and whatever else, and then she was, you know, traumatized afresh by the experience. And she talks about things like, you know, she still has the birthday card from her brother with, you know, with a bullet hole in it and a bit of her brother's blood on it. And she wanted to kind of put her birthday cake into the coffin with her brothers. So, like, you know, there are incredibly heartbreaking details, even at their move of 30 years. But the story for me, like, you know, I was talking to Eamon about his boys, and one of the things that stuck with me is Eamon said that his birthday is the 11th of the 11th, you know, Remembrance Day. And he said, you know, I watch, you know, on his birthday, he watches Remembrance Day services and people weeping over the loss of their parents or grandparents in the First World War. And he says, but what about me and my sons? You know, I'm supposed to move on. Church and state are saying, you know, we need to kind of move on and kind of put all this behind us. But he says, no, I want my children to be remembered. You know, I want my grandchildren to know exactly, you know, who, you know, what type of men or young boys their uncles were. And, you know, that to me is kind of one of the, you know, is reason enough to write a book like this.
Of course.
To kind of, like, I work in newspapers, here today, gone tomorrow. Nowadays, most of the time, they're just read online. Whereas I think a book has more hope of permanence, it's more long lasting.
I described it as a book of truth when I was kind of introducing this conversation. And what the book said to me is that we really don't need a commission or a court to give us truth. I believe the stories that those people have shared with you, it is a raw truth, but it is the truth. Very hard to challenge what people are saying to you in that book. But other names pop up in the book, like surprises. They pop up out of nowhere. Prince Charles, Bram Faulkner, Bill Craig, Kevin Winters, the solicitor, and Gary MacDonald, the journalist, in roles I didn't know or and only learned about when I read some of that this morning. Talk to us a little bit about that, Martin, how they become threads in this story.
Sure. So, you know, sport can make for strange bedfellows, I guess. Like, so John Michael Feeney, I was at school with Declan Feeney, his son. He was a couple of years ahead of me. So they're a really sporting family. John Michael Feeney had boxed professionally. He was trainer at the Lawrence Manor Hallsmill Boxing Club. His son Jimmy had won an All-Ireland senior boxing title in the National Stadium in Dublin on a Friday night. And 2 nights later, John Michael was bringing Jimmy to show off his son and his medal to friends, as you would. So he brought him to this place, which he'd never actually been before, Bleary Darts Club, which is really like a shebeen. It was an old weaver's cottage. Yeah. And when I discovered that detail, that kind of spoke to me, because the title of the book is Dirty Linen. So I was drawing on the particular industrial heritage of the area, which is the linen industry. So this weaver's cottage, so I say, like in the book, many other weavers' cottages were abandoned 150 years previously at a time of an earlier kind of pogrom against Catholic families in the area, because they posed an industrial threat. This is around the time of the foundation of the Orange Order set against the 1798 rebellion. So the roots go deep. But anyway, so this weaver's cottage was now actually a darts club.
Poker night.
Yeah. Poker night, all sorts.
Yeah.
And so Jimmy just stepped out to go to the toilet, and when he was coming back, he heard noise and saw gunmen opening fire and killing his father and 2 other men, and seriously injuring another. And he was able to tell the police the colour of the trousers that the gunman was wearing, because the only available light was the muzzle flash from the gun that was killing his father. And I said, what light could be darker than that? And that was the light he saw by for the rest of his day.
3 different guns fired that night, isn't that right?
3 shotgun,
almost in a relay, if you like.
Yeah.
You know?
So, and Jimmy's story, like, so John Michael Feeney died that night, and John Michael he just got a new job. He was number 2 to Brian Faulkner in the Ivy Harriers, which is the local hunt. So he hunted all his life, which is one of my sort of strange bedfellows. So Brian Faulkner had been former, last Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, had just led the parish executive, but he was a very keen huntsman. In fact, he died falling from a horse just a couple of years later. So anyway, Jimmy was also a victim because, after what happened to him, he got sort of sucked into the official IRA, ended up in Long Kesh, and then, his life was ruined by alcoholism, and he ended up taking his own life. And I see him very much as a victim of the Troubles, as much as his father. Declan, he went to England. He wanted to, follow in his father's footsteps, get involved in a hunt. So he ended up working in various hunts and ended up being introduced to Prince Charles and hunting with him, invited to Highgrove several times for dinner. And Prince Charles had obviously been briefed as to who he was riding with, so he knew the whole story, and he was asking Declan, and he was saying his mum was a great woman, whatever, and to pass that on.
He asked for that message to be passed on.
Yeah, and then
Declan chatted to his mum about that. She wasn't.
Photograph. He says, Declan sent to his mum a photograph of him and his wife with Charles and Camilla at Highgrove, whatever, and it was never mentioned in the subsequent phone conversation. And eventually, Declan couldn't help himself anymore, and he said, what do you think?
Yeah.
And he sort of said something like, "You put a beggar on horseback and you ride all the way to hell."
Yeah.
In other words, don't get any notions. And it was very touching because another a cousin Fergie, every time he came around, he made a good show. Like, the mum had never said anything about the photograph, but actually she'd framed it and put it on the mantelpiece. Yeah. So tough love.
Yeah.
But then Fergie, another cousin, every time he came around, made a great show of putting it flat on the trailer. So, but I think those details or whatever are kind of important because I think it brings it home to these are ordinary people, same as you and me, and they kind of,
Well, humour saved us, and
often it did.
And so there's the story about the plastic daffodils in the book as well.
Yes. So Bobby Harrison, like, one of the very important things in the book is that this isn't like, there's a lot of stuff about collusion in the book about Catholic citizens or civilians who were murdered by loyalist paramilitaries who were clearly being aided and abetted by rogue elements in the security forces. This is being investigated. Like, there's almost like a shadow book behind this because a lot of the people I was interviewing had already been interviewed by John Boucher, who's now the interim chief constable of the PSNI, but he has been conducting an investigation into the Glenanne gang, which is going to be the Denton report, which is due out next May. And I very much hope that this book is out of date within 6 months. Not many authors would say that, but I really hope that when his report comes out, if it comes out, and families are concerned that he is now this man who has won their trust and is now.
You used the line in the book about Sampson and Stalker and Stevens being run out of
Dodge. It wasn't my line. It's actually
another
of the families, and they were sort of saying to John Boucher, "Listen, this is not our first rodeo. Effectively, Sampson, Stalker, Stevens all run out of Dodge. Are you going to be any different?" So there is understandable degrees of suspicion, but also a lot of trust in him. So.
But you hope those reports will advance.
I really hope. I think if John Boucher becomes permanent chief constable, it would get his reign off to a very bad start if the report doesn't come out, or if it comes out and it's covered in black type like so many other previous reports have been.
Yeah. So tell us about the plastic daffodils.
Sorry. Yes. So. Bobby Harrison. So I was making the point. It's very important to me that there are Protestant victims and RUC men and a TA soldier and three British soldiers. So Bobby Harrison was a bit of a practical joker. So he was, he was in the B Specials, he was in the UDR, and then he was in an RUC reservist, and he was in a kind of a sort of flute band or whatever in
the orange and the black in
Guildford. So ticked a lot of boxes, if you might say. But
he was also the longest serving nurse in the local hospital, the Banfield Hospital, which again was a former linen lord's mansion. And you know, he had Catholic friends, as his wife did. There's a very touching story in the book about his wife Gladys. Her best friend growing up in Tullalish was a woman called Mrs. McInerney. And they used to meet up every Sunday. So Mrs. McInerney would go to Half-Eight Mass in Lawrencetown, and Mrs. Harrison would go to 11:30 service in Tullalish Church of Ireland.
Coffee in between.
In between, coffee and whatever, and then Bobby Harrison would be there, sometimes bringing her or hanging, you know, visiting Mr. McInerney. And when he was dying of cancer, Bobby, because he was a nurse, sat beside him and was with him when he died. Like, so that's incredibly touching. And Barney O'Dowd, you know, these things. This is a small rural place. People's lives intersect, and like Bobby and Barney, their politics wouldn't be the same, but they got on. You know, they respected each other, and they would have sort of, you know, political discussions on a Sunday morning on the doorstep, sort of thing. But back to Bobby and his pranks. So there was a very keen gardener in Banville Hospital, and he was very proud of the vegetables and flowers that he planted. But anyway, one January, middle of winter, Bobby Harrison came in and said to the guy, his name was Bleaks or something, Bleaks, come on out here, I can't believe this. You know, you don't have to believe what's happening in your garden. And he planted all these kind of artificial flowers in the middle of winter. And, you know, that was one example. And then, you know, yeah. So again, personality shines through, and I think that's important to kind of humanize, to sort of see beyond the uniform.
You want to read a little bit from it?
Yeah, see, I'm going to do this. So this is the first 3 pages from a chapter entitled Dreadful Symmetry. It's a story of Donna Barry. So Donna's dad, Pat Campbell, was the shop steward in Down Shoes, the largest employer in Banbridge. And Pat was the first victim of Robin Jackson, the Jackal, who also lived in my parish. He lived in Donaghcloney, and he was, you know, probably the most notorious serial killer in the Troubles. He's linked to over 50 deaths. He was actually identified. Margaret Campbell opened the door to him, and he was a former colleague of her husband. She didn't know him, but she, you know, was able to describe him, and she was able to pick him up out in an ID parade. And yet, this wasn't sufficient evidence to convict him. He was let go. He had been arrested and I think charged, but then after Christmas, the charges were dropped after conversations between senior police officers and the DPP. And there is evidence that the charges were dropped because he became an agent or an informer for the security forces. And you kind of wonder, you know, just how useful his information that he was providing were, because as I said, he went on to be involved in the Dublin Modern bombings, the Abbey Showban massacre, the Very Darts Club shootings. So you kind of think, you know, he was doing all of this, so the evidence or whatever must have been incredibly useful that he was passing on to the security forces if he was allowed to do all of this and stay a free man for so long. Anyway, when I asked Donna Barry what memories she has of her father, Pat Campbell, the preface to her answer has a painful poignancy. The good memories. He used to say God should have given him 3 knees, because I had 1 knee and the 2 boys, her brothers Paddy and Stephen, had to share his other knee when he came in from work. He was very loving and very gentle, you know. We would all have been excited to see him. We'd have brought his slippers. The boys would have brought a slipper each, and I would have took his white coat. The bad memory, the one that has never faded and may never fade, is the night in 1973 when he was murdered. I still remember that night as if it happened last night, says Donna, who was only 10 years old at the time. Paddy was 11, Stephen just 7. Donna and her brothers were all in bed when there was knocking at the door. Donna's family lived in a bungalow on Klein Walk in Banbridge, County Down. Her bedroom door was down the hallway, directly in line with the front door,
where her father had been standing when 2 gunmen shot him dead. I run out into the hall and it was just carnage. There was a wee half-moon hall table and a wee brass gong used to sit on it. Daddy would have banged it, dinner's ready, you know, carrying on, and we would all have been running then. And it was in smithereens and the glass at the front door was everywhere. And Mummy says to me, get down on your knees. Right, hold your daddy's head, hold his head still. And I wasn't allowed to let him move. I asked why, and she said she didn't want his face cut. And when I looked, I couldn't understand why she didn't want his face cut. Well, there was just a massive hole, that's what it was. Pat Campbell worked on the production line in Down Shoes, the shoe factory that was by far the biggest employer in Banbridge since the linen industry collapsed in the 1950s. Hence the white coat which Donna helped him to take off every night. One day she put her hand into the pocket and found a scrap of fur, which he had clipped from a pair of slippers he'd been working on and absent-mindedly put in his pocket. It was only a wee tiny piece of fur, but I got so excited, Donna recalls. I just loved the feel of it, and so every so often then, he would have took home only a wee tiny piece. And I used to keep them in a shoebox, and when I was going to bed at night, Mummy says I had the fur all out. I don't really remember, you know, I was only 4 or 5 years old. And they would have waited till I was sleeping, and then took the fur and put it in the box under the bed. And that was the ritual every night. In about 2007, when the HET was reinvestigating her father's murder, Donna was going through a very hard time. She was happily married to Paddy Barry, an old primary school classmate of mine from Lawrencetown, and had 3 of her own children, but was suffering from depression. I always had depression, you know, as a teenager and all. I just never connected it to my daddy's death. But I remember it was a Saturday night and the boys was in bed, and Paddy saying to me, and he wasn't being nasty, Donna, you're going to have to pull yourself together, or you're going to end up in the ETU, and them 3 children is depending on you. And I took the huff and I went up to bed and I pulled the quilt over me and I says, think of something else, think of something else. I got a photograph of my dad and me lodged in my head, but I couldn't find it. All I could think about was I must leave that coat into the cleaners because I can't wash it in the machine with the fur on it. And the fur, this came into my head and such a feeling I got. I could feel my daddy's arms around me and I could see this box of fur and the comfort that I got from that box of fur. And before this, Mummy had been telling me, Donna, talk to your daddy and he'll answer you. Talk to your daddy and you get peace. I phoned Mummy the next morning and I didn't even get the words out. She says, your daddy spoke to you last night. And I said, it's not that he spoke to me, Mummy, he was with me. And she asked me about it and she says to me, do you remember the box of fur? And I says, no, Mummy, but the feeling I got from this box of fur, I says, I never ever had such a feeling of peace. So she told me about it. Donna's mascara is running. As she dabs her eyes with a hanky, her tears are black.
And that's what's different, Martin, about the book. You know, that it brings forward those personal moments, personal grief, comfort. You know, the other thing that comes through in the book too is the commentary from people when they talk about, you know, they couldn't be bitter, they couldn't be angry, they tried to blank it out, they didn't talk about it. And there's a lovely line from Jennifer McNairn in the book. She and her sister so badly injured in the Abercorn bomb, when she talked about the first time she was allowed to be in it, and how good it felt. And I think what also comes through in all of that too is when we get to 1998 and the political agreement, what we call the peace agreement, they felt they were being left behind again, that there was nothing in this for them, that they had to give up on their hopes for justice, and they had to fight a war to get a pension, to get some sort of acknowledgement. Talk to us a little bit about meeting Jennifer and Margaret and Colin Davidson's piece of work, Silent Testimony,
yeah.
which
So I guess, you try and tell, each story differently according to, you find a way in, I guess. With Alan Gurley, who I think I mentioned before, he was in the Territorial Army pipe band, so I kind of spoke a bit about, his love of bagpipes, and, he fell in love with the smell, not so much the sound, but the smell of the wool. With Margaret and Jennifer, what drew me to that story. So Margaret, I'm from Banbridge, went to secondary school in Banbridge. Mum and Dad had a shop in the town, so I was a schoolboy at the time when Alan McCrum was killed, just a couple of years younger than me. So it was very much, that so easily could have been me, so it could easily have happened to me. So Margaret's story, would break your heart. So she was working in an estate agents. We talked about Susie Lamplugh, the story of the London estate agent who, disappeared, having brought a stranger to live in some house. But I make the point that, the harm befell Margaret not in some, remote house or whatever. It happened on a high street in the shop, because the bomb blew up, the glass shattered, and her face was shredded, and she lost her eyesight. And it was heartbreaking, for me to listen to her say that she didn't want to leave hospital until they fixed her, until they kind of helped her see again. And she said, who doesn't want to leave hospital? And she also spoke about not going to her old shopping towns of Moira and Hillsborough because she didn't want people to see her as she was now. And she always wore dark glasses, and she would eat her meals in the kitchen by herself because she didn't, again, self-conscious because she had lost her sight. All those details, would break your heart. But
she met Jennifer at a wave Christmas dinner.
Yes, she did. I think Jennifer said something to her like, you're eating the decorations. The tinsel had fallen from the ceiling on her bed. And so they had a wonderful relationship. So Jennifer, as you said, she lost her legs in the Abercorn bombing. Her sister also lost both her legs, an arm and an eye. This was an IRA no warning bombing. Rosalind, correct. And she was engaged to be married. And again, one of the heartwarming, you're always kind of looking for some glimmer of light in all of this darkness. And one of the things that sort of impressed me, I guess, was that, Rosalind's fiance didn't sort of turn tail after, the woman he was about to be married to was so badly maimed. The marriage went ahead, and they're still together. They had a child. That's heartwarming. That's worth dwelling on, I think. But the other thing that connected, as well as meeting through We Are This Victims charity, which does such tremendous work supporting victims, is through art. So Margaret was painted by Colin Davidson for his series Silent Testimony, which was recently on again in New York. It's been staged in, I think it's in the Ulster Museum. It's been
100,000 people visited.
Remarkable. It really is a landmark. He's probably too modest to say so. He describes Effie McWilliam's Women of Belfast sculpture as the iconic image of the Troubles. But I think Silent Testimony, for me, is the one that encapsulates, all of that trauma, the long tail of that trauma. So he painted Margaret, but obviously because Margaret couldn't see, he allowed her to kind of touch the painting with, he talked her through it and smell the linseed oil up close, whatever. So that to me was incredibly powerful. The connection with Jennifer is, so the women of the Abercorn bombing inspired, if that's the word, Effie McWilliam, a Banbridge-born, probably the most famous sculptor from the north. There's a gallery with his studio transposed after his death from London back to Banbridge. And he did a series of sculptures called The Women of Belfast or Women in a Bomb Blast and so forth. And so that was another kind of connection, if you like, how art can kind of somehow encapsulate the tragedy of the Troubles.
It can be kinder than our politics.
Without a doubt.
Shall we have a chat with our audience?
Surely.
If there's a question or two or three. Here we go.
I have a ruling my question. I have room to break right into it. Hello, Martin. You don't maybe remember me, Dominic Magdalene in Badlands. I live in Sweden, and I just want to say thank you 3 times. Thank you for writing this. I'm looking at your mother Marie. I think it's your mother Marie, is it?
It is, yeah.
She knew my mommy. Pat Campbell was one of my for this friends. I went to Badlands Academy like yourself. Actually, whenever I wrote congratulations, Martin, on your publication, I was verbally attacked by people that went to Badlands and said, but Dominic, you loved the academy. And I suggested Martin Doyle loved the academy too. We were 2 people who probably enjoyed the academy a lot. But if you weren't in the minority, you didn't see the silent treatment or the exclusion, and sometimes the blatant stuff that went on. And I really commend you on being able to touch on such subjects. So Martin, I just want to actually ask you about the academy, because a lot of people were ignoring all the stories from 1920 and the pogrom in Banbridge and the burning out of the Catholics and things that were never ever talked about, never mentioned in Banbridge. People didn't talk about stuff like that. You bring that all up now, and a lot of people are starting to talk about important topics.
Yeah.
So my question is, has anybody from the leadership in the academy reached out to you? Because I know they've been reaching out to other people and saying, oh my God, it wasn't like that.
Well, there is an interview, thanks Dominic, there is an interview in the book with David Griffin, who's a former teacher of mine. And so we've had, like, you know, this isn't my first rodeo, like I've written about this before. Like I wrote a column about it in the Irish Post, my old paper in London way back when. And David had a brother who was a teacher in London who brought it to his attention. So we sat down and had a chat about it. You know, we sort of remember things differently. And again, after Dirty Linen, the essay was published in the Irish Times and Paul McVeigh's anthology, again, I had another conversation with David about it, and there's quite an extensive interview with him in the book, and we come to some kind of rapprochement, let's say. So no, like I think it's funny because there's a lot of murders in this book, and probably I don't know what the latest part of Bruce might make of it. I think they'll probably think, yeah, we did that. Yeah, we'll probably do it again if the circumstances dictated. But it's funny that the bit that seems to get under people's skin is the sectarianism. I see it, a spectrum that starts with slurs and ends with assassinations. And there is such denial. There really is. I got a hostile message on social media from a guy who was a few years older than me at school. And he said he was from a mixed marriage, his parents were from a mixed marriage, he'd lots of Catholic friends, what are you going on about? And he also sort of said, I haven't read your book, I'm not going to read your book. Well, that was the starting point. I'm not going to read your book. And I said, I don't know what you think about murdering IRA scum. Read the book, find out. And so forth. And then, he goes, maybe this is a teachable moment or whatever, I look forward to sort of sharing, your thoughts. And he goes, teachable moment, WTF? But, it's funny because we have 2 mutual friends on Facebook, and they're both in the book, and they both talk about their sectarian experience. Paula is here tonight. Paula, there's a story in the Belfast Telegraph about her experience. She is a pillar of society, if you don't mind me saying so, Paula. Special needs principal for many years. OBE, I think that's the MBE. And attended the Queen's funeral. That's how, inside track she is in terms of the respect in which she is held in Northern society. Her career as a special needs principal was almost sabotaged at birth by the sectarian actions of our headmaster, Frank Dorman, when we were both at school. He gave her such a bad and untrue reference that she had to repeat her A-levels, not to get the grades to get into university, but to get an honest reference. And to be fair, David Griffin, the teacher, the history teacher, he actually helped her because the curriculum was different at the Catholic school. So he, of his free time, helped her to reset her A-levels. So where there's goodness, I pointed out, but where there's badness, I pointed out, and I make no apology for it.
Just here.
There's plenty like you.
I have a couple of questions, but the first one is, how did the cover come about?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. We sort of went around the houses. So the cover designer is a guy called Gabriel McCarthy, who's down in Kerry, but so we did it kind of remotely. He does all the Tramp Press. I don't know if you're familiar with Tramp Press. They're one of the best small publishers in the South. So I have every confidence with him. He does brilliant work. I think this is a stock image, and we kind of thought, it's a bit dark, whatever. And I kind of thought, like, I'd only seen it on the screen, and to me they looked like feathers rather than rags or linen. So I wasn't sure. And we went around the houses, and I came across this image. It was so the epigraph to the book is from Seamus Heaney's poem Lintwater, and it's all about kind of the polluting of water by the linen industry as a kind of a metaphor for sectarianism, tainting the north, and the stench actually produced by the process. So I found this image of workers in the river with kind of stooks of flax from which linen is made, throwing them out of the water onto the bank, and like they looked kind of like corpses or whatever. Like this is an image that's been used by Heaney and also by Longley. So I kind of thought that it looked sinister. Like we didn't want kind of a crime scene photograph. We wanted something a bit more abstract because I guess this isn't true crime. This is about memory. This is about commemoration. This is about loss. This is about love. And then we decided, so we wanted something abstract that wasn't of a particular, that was timeless. The problem was when the editor, Helen, looked at it, she said, that makes me think of the 1930s or something, which is probably when it was set. So we realized that, okay, whilst it wasn't specific to the Troubles, it was specific to the wrong period, so that wasn't going to work. So that was chucked, and then we ended up actually coming back to one of the original images, but I'd suggested, just putting a bit of blood at the end of the linen rags, whatever, to kind of subtly, discreetly make the point. Like there was an earlier image which was a bit more like a hanky that after a nosebleed, it was too gory.
Yeah.
And that was, I wasn't mad about that. But this, subtle, but I think it does the trick. And yeah, like there's a lot of people that commented on it. But actually the funny thing is that, what I didn't realize that, a hardback book comes with its own second cover, or the, so like the book itself, I hope it has layers. So, the blue cover, I pretentiously said reminds me of Ulysses' first mission. Or my cornflower blue eyes, or, the blue flax flower, all of these things. But it's, it's a lovely production. Like, one of the reasons I went with Mary, well, there's two reasons. One, they produce beautiful looking books, like Old Ireland Colour. They sold over €1 million worth of that book. These colorized photographs of through Irish history. It was, a really attractive production. And the other reason is that Conor Graham, although they're based in Newbridge, County Kildare, he's originally from Hollywood. In fact, Brian moved into his old house. It all connects.
Yeah, will I tell that
You tell that story.
Yeah, I was writing a book, Political Purgatory, during COVID, and I was sitting in my roof space, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, asking myself, why the hell am I writing this during COVID? The bookshops are closed, the publishers are closed, and somebody said to me, you should chat to a lad in Kildare, Conor Graham. He says, from your hometown, Hollywood. So I rang Conor, I think Conor rang me actually, and we sorted the book out. And I said to him, look, Conor, what's your Hollywood connection? He said, not many of us left there now. Yeah. Called me Barney, nobody calls me Brian. He said, but my father was Tony Graham. And I said, did you live at 29 Wood End? And he said, how do you know that? I said, well, when we were intimidated out of our home in 1973, I think it was, as you left 29 Wood End, we moved into it. I was 13 or 14 years of age, he was 2 or 3. And So the little dots that join us up.
And you could take that on as well, like, because you moved to Hollywood as a respite or as a safe place to move to from Belfast. I had Louise Kennedy is from Hollywood, and her family had the local pub, and they were burnt out, and so she fled from the place that you had gone to as a place of safety.
Yeah, we were forced out more than burnt out. But you write in the book, Martin, about people barricading their doors, planks behind the door. That was my mother and father. That was our house in the early 70s.
There were desperate times.
Yeah.
Like one of the victims from the Berry Darts Club massacre.
Yeah.
Before he died in that circumstance, he lived in this terrace called Cranny Terrace.
Yeah.
Pejoratively known to some local Protestants as Pope's Road, because it was an exclusively Catholic street in the middle of the countryside. So when the first victims of the Troubles in Tullalish died, there were 3 British soldiers. It was the house of a man who had been interned and had been abandoned since, and was booby-trapped. But the local kids from Cranny Terrace were using it as a playhouse. So the title of that chapter is A Booby Trap Playhouse. They'd get in like the streets of mob to get in through the roof. So, there's no suggestion, there's no at all likelihood that there was any local involvement in that triple murder, because the local kids were using it as a playhouse. They could so easily have been victims themselves. But as a result of that, local Protestants were up in arms, and the target of their ire was Cranny Terrace, Pope's Road. And so all of those Catholics, there was a road around the back of the house, so that at night they barricaded it off, and they had a kind of a vigilante garage to protect. That's where one of the people I spoke to, they used planks of wood that reached from the front door to the bottom of the stairs to ram it shut. And Joe Toman, the terrace went down like that there, so his house was level with the road. So when he was sitting in his armchair in the living room, his head could be seen from the road if anybody shot in.
Put some breeze blocks.
So he put breeze blocks on his. This is how the people lived. They put breeze blocks on the inside of their windowsill in the living room to protect him, like sandbags in a First World War trench.
Scary.
So he didn't die that way, but he died a couple of years later in the Darts Club.
We'll take another couple of questions if we can. Here we are, just.
Hello, Martin.
Jim, how you doing?
Hi, Martin. Jim Michael. Or just to give you an insight to what I said about the Language Academy, you might have thought it was a Provost College right after 7 years. And
to be fair, I'm well aware of it when I was flying on into the bar.
2,100 masses and 2,000 rosaries and benedictions.
Well, not just that, not just that, but a paedophile principle.
I was going to ask you, Martin, that we ended up after the 4,000 almost to die here through the Troubles with the arch protagonists, Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness, finding common ground and realizing that they could get on very well with each other. And I think those 2 ladies that you mentioned, one had gone to the Church of Ireland and one had gone to the Catholic Mass, and then a couple of in between, are exemplary of the fact that we as a people here are more that unites us than divides us. Did you find in writing this that there was an underbelly of hope and desire that we might reach out to that underlying truth that is as yet unexpressed?
Absolutely. So, wherever possible, I didn't particularly go out seeking for bright spots or whatever else, but just that would come up in conversation, like Billy Duffy, one of the people I interviewed about Pat Campbell, who's a friend of Pat Feeney, who was shot dead in the linen mill in Donaghcloney. Billy sadly has passed away since I interviewed him, which I guess in itself reminds me of why this sort of book is important, because these stories won't be around forever. But Billy told a story about how his next door neighbour, one of the few Protestants who lived in Miller Park, would, unannounced, just knock on the back door and deliver a trout that he had caught from the river Bann, scaled it, gutted it, ready for the pan. And that's just an act of kind of neighbourly kindness or whatever. Like, but you know, that is what Miller Park was like. Like, you know, one of our, you know, closest neighbours in Miller Park was Derek Kearns, a Protestant man, and lovely man. He had a market garden, whatever, and his front, you know, these were council houses, whatever. Like, but the front garden was a blaze of colour, or whatever. Like, you know, I still can picture it to this day. And you know, my dad co-founded the Lawrencetown Swifts, the local football team. I think Derek was one of the first managers. Like, we lived together, and you know, we you know, I had a hard time at the academy, but I also had several Protestant friends to this day. You know, I mentioned a couple of the stories in the book. You know, I think, you know, there are good people and there are bad people, and I think there are far more good than bad, for sure. Yeah.
Anyone else? Yeah, here we are. Just we'll take this one and one more if there's. Matt, yeah.
Like yourself, when I went to Badlands, Doyle, come from Rowan, travel, the people from the academy, they didn't speak to us. But also remember the people who hadn't got the story out all around Northern Ireland, which knew the truth, they were telling the truth, but there's nobody believed them. And those people are sitting probably very angry today that they were never believed by society, by police, and to this day they will never ever get an answer. Some of the families here hopefully will get an answer, but there's a lot of people all over Northern Ireland are suffering because of that, and they were afraid for their family. If something happened to their family, and people had to go because of sectarianism, but also that family left us in that time. If anything happened to them, they had to keep quiet because they were afraid, so afraid that some of their family would be killed.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
A lot of that was buried, wasn't it, Martin? You know, a lot of that.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fear. Like, you know, you kind of think, you know, if you can't even sort of, you know, speak the truth after something terrible happens, when can you? But the truth is, you know, people were terrified by what had happened, and people left. Like, you know, the O'Dowds left because of fear for you know, that you know, that worse might come.
And some people questioned them for leaving. Isn't that right? If I read your book correctly, isn't that right? Challenged them for leaving.
Well, you know, directly or
Giving up
indirectly,
the
but
house.
like, you know, why would you kind of, you know, isn't that letting, you know, the terrors win or whatever? I'm sure that will be an attitude. Or
You went back to that house, the O'Dowd house with Noel, to look through it. You know, 3 people shot dead in it. Barney seriously wounded in it. Talk to us a little bit about going back into that.
Yeah, so like Noel was Barney's son, 2 of whose brothers were killed, as well as his uncle. So he told me the story of what happened so he told me the story in the family farmhouse in the south.
He shared all
So I knew the story, but then he said, you know, I'll show you. Would you like to? The house is lying derelict there. There's 45 years. Would you like to see it? So I kind of thought, you know, if I'm going to tell this story, I think I probably should see it with my own eyes. And so that was, I don't know, like, you know, there is all this talk about psychogeography and, you know, how places are hauntology, our places are haunted and all whatever. But like, there is no doubt, you know, visiting this derelict farmhouse, you know, with its sort of modern 70s extension with the kind of crazy paving fireplace, so evocative of the 70s, a big picture window, completely covered up with breeze blocks. Only now am I thinking that's almost like an echo of Joe Toman with his one layer of breeze blocks. This entire house is blocked up with breeze blocks. We get in through the kitchen, there's corrugated iron, you could pull back and you go in, and you know, the roof had somehow given way. There was ivy creeping down. There was all the sort of dust and debris had come down through the chimney. You know, there was kind of
sleeping bag there.
And a discarded sleeping bag, and you're kind of thinking, who would sleep here? Like, you know, how desperate do you have to be to sort of even find the place, because it's down this country lane and then it's down a farm lane. That's a dog leg, so you can't even see it from the road.
But seeing it helped your writing, no doubt.
It did, just, Noel retold the story as we walked through the rooms, Barney was shot here, Declan was shot over there, there's a bullet hole in the kitchen where all the women folk had barricaded themselves, yeah. So, it kind of it totally brings it home to you. And also, yeah, you do get a sense of time, really, it was like a place that had been caught in time in the mid-70s. But also
escape from the gunfire as well. There was nowhere to run for them really. It was
no, and one of the ironies was that there was a shotgun. There were farmers that had a shotgun, but because there was going to be kids around, what do? You kind of, you take precautions. So the precaution they took was to kind of put the farmer's shotgun up high or out of the road, which might have protected them. But who would have thought? Very powerful. I say, we have Cultraw, the Ulster Folk and Heritage Museum in Cultraw is a celebration of Ulster, of our built heritage, tells the story of the North through buildings. And actually from my parish of Tullalish, there is a linen watch tower, where a night watchman would stand and look over the bleach screens with this valuable cloth left out overnight. There is a weaver's cottage from Ballydugan. The O'Dowds lived in Ballydugan. And I sort of say, obviously, it would be, something that the family would have to think about. But I would kind of say, there should be a murder house in Cultraw. The O'Dowds farmhouse tells the story of the Troubles as any building in Cultraw. And I kind of think we need to trouble the narrative. Cultraw shouldn't just be a celebration of, prosperous farmers and developing the land. It should also tell the story of the trauma and the terror that was imposed on so many innocent civilians in our history.
Malachi, I saw you with your hand up. We'll take a last question here from Malachi and then a final word from Martin.
Yeah, Martin, thanks very much. It's really fascinating stuff. But I'm intrigued by two things that you said. One was you said that you see a spectrum between the slur and the assassination.
Yeah.
There's a continuum there. And that sectarianism is the thing that really gets under people's skin. That's the thing they won't own up to. And then you also spoke about your friend at Banbridge College who couldn't see things the way you saw them. And I'm just wondering, what's the distance between willful sectarianism and some kind of blindness that just inhibits people from really getting a grasp of things?
You know what my solution is? Read the book. Yeah, I think there is an element of denial. Even the guy that I'm talking about wasn't a friend. He was somebody that was a few years above me at school. But I do have friends, and they don't remember things the way that I did. I had to kind of remind one. I'm talking when she was at school, she was an ally. She was a good friend of mine. And when nasty things happened, she had my back. But she'd forgotten a lot of it, and I had to keep sort of reminding her that this was a sectarian place, that there was constant sectarian stuff. And eventually said, oh yeah, I went out with a Catholic and I got a lot of hard times from the girls from Dromore and Rathfriland. But it was almost like knocking at a door for 5 minutes before it opened. I think it was so kind of accepted, normalized. There were people that I spoke to about this book, and they told me stories, and in the end, they decided not to go on the record without any real explanation why. Kind of understandable why, to be honest, I suppose, because, maybe there is a price to be paid for talking out of school, for washing your dirty linen in public, because, people don't like to see it hanging on the line. But I do think, you can't move on. There's a line in it from a historian of Eamon Phoenix, the late Eamon Phoenix, who's not a historian of national standing, but actually had roots in Tullalish. So he has a wonderful sounding board for this book. Sadly, he also has passed away. But there's something that, to understand the past is to cease to live in it. And I kind of think, how can you move on if you're not honest about what you lived through?
I think, we could all sort of take a beat and look back in our own lives or whatever. Like my mum told me stories about, people would come into the shop, whatever, like, and they would tell their tale of woe, and so fell off a building site and died or whatever, like, and such and such and such. And then to top it all, she married a Catholic. What could be worse? It's the pettiness or whatever that kind of, it makes a story out of it, and I kind of think it rings true. Like, there's nothing there that's made up, whatever. People mightn't recognize themselves in it. They mightn't recognize the school they went to. For example, Pat Campbell was shop steward in Down Shoes. Now, Mum, lots of my family worked in Down Shoes, and there used to be Union Jacks flying from machines. Every stitching machine had a little Union Jack on it. How is that acceptable? But it was acceptable. It was reality. It was normality in Northern Ireland for decades until people sort of said this is absolutely unacceptable. Now I'm maybe pushing out the boat when I'm saying when I come home to the north. I live in the south. I come home in the north in the summer, and for about a month, if not 2 months in the summer, there's Union Jacks or Loyalist flags on every lamppost on the main street. There's a triumphal orange arch over the cut, and that you have to sort of drive under. You have red, white, and blue bunting strung up, from every lamppost. Down the side streets, it's like a metaphor. There are Loyalist paramilitary flags. Not good enough for the main street, but what leads off it. And I kind of think, how is that acceptable? I think that's as unacceptable in a mixed town as the inside of Down Shoes factory back in the day. So, yeah.
Martin, you did speak to me yesterday about hope, and for all that is still wrong, we're in a better place. There is no doubt about that. I think there is a huge challenge, still ahead of us. I'm reading Stephen Walker's book at the moment on John Hume. There's a line in it about the collapse of the executive in 1974. The executive press office issued a line, "Let 1974 be our year of reconciliation." Here we are on the eve of 2024, 50 years on, wondering, will 2024 be our year of reconciliation? But when you look out, what do you see in terms of the road ahead?
I see, I think the people are I think the people are way ahead of the politicians.
Yeah.
When I first started working, for a long time, this was a project. It wasn't a book. I didn't know whether enough people would speak to me for it to mount to anything enough to be published. And I got funding from a group called the Social Change Initiative, which is funded by Chuck Feeney, who sadly passed away there. A genuine philanthropist. We have a lot of billionaires these days, but far fewer philanthropists. He was one. They had a kind of a fellowship program where I went on a couple of weekends away with a lot of community activists, people who are working at the grassroots, making a real difference to people's lives in their communities from both sides of the community. And I find that incredibly inspiring, the kind of work that was going on, not just within communities, but also bringing communities together at peace lines and all the rest of it, at interfaces. So that gives me enormous hope. And other things like, say, Linda Irvin, the work that she's doing for the Irish language. People who cross the aisle are people that I have enormous respect for. People who
Step out from their tribe.
Totally, and whether it's through a love of the Irish language, or maybe of Gaelic games, or as Kevin Winters and his father, so Kevin Winters will be well known as a human rights solicitor, but his dad was in the MacDonald Memorial Pipe Band as a band of bagpipers in sort of between Dromore and Dromara, with Gary MacDonald from the Irish News business editor. It's his father's family band. So people do cross the aisle all the time, and they are, frankly, in my opinion, the best of us.
Yeah. there was a line from Alan McBride speaking about 30 years on from the Shankill bomb, that week in which the Cairns boys were shot dead in their home, where he talked about the need for a kinder type of politics. And yet when we look out in the world at the moment, it seems to be becoming more cruel. It's lost its way in terms of kindness. We think of that week 30 years ago, and I think of the Shankill bomb. I was there that day. Multiply that by 70 and you're the night in Gaza. So for all of the work we still have to do, we've come a long way. Your book has made a tremendous contribution to our understanding of things, Martin. And I think alongside Lost Lives and alongside Silent Testimony, and they give us a way, if you like, of remembering, proper remembering in terms of our past, doing what the woman in the audience said a moment ago, letting people tell their stories. And it is a book of truth. Martin, congratulations on it. I know you've got some signing to do, and there will be people who want to buy it, but thank you to the Linden Hall. Thank you for this conversation, and thanks very much to our audience as well. Thank you very much.
I can just say a couple of thank yous as well. Thank you to Barney, if I may, for giving up his time this evening to interview me, having spent the last couple of days reading the book. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much to Patsy and the Linden Hall. I keep trying to say Linden Hall Library, just Linden Hall. This is a wonderful institution, and it's such an apt place to have a Belfast launch for a book called Dirty Linen, but also with its own heritage of its roots in 1798 and the United Irishmen bringing together Catholic, Protestant and dissenter is essential as well. And thank you to Leo and Maria, who very kindly brought these stooks of linen, our wonderful heritage from our industrial past. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming.